In this video I'm going to compare the GD-77 and the Baofeng DM-1801 in terms of the hardware. This is GD-77. I've replaced the label and put an Open GD-77 label on that one because it's running the Open GD-77 firmware, but it's just a stock GD-77. And on the right is the Baofeng DM-1801. They look very similar radios. The key difference between the two physically is that the 1801 has got this kind of rocker style arrows keypad in the middle and separate buttons for, I presume, A and B VFO and VFO or memory, which is quite a nice feature to have actually. I do find actually with this, which I can't demonstrate because it's actually in pieces, that pushing on the buttons actually seems to press down and affect the display, which isn't so good. But in terms of having a couple of extra buttons, yeah, would be better really for the operation, especially of the Open GD-77 firmware if the GD-77 had those. But obviously the buttons are smaller as well, so some people might find that a problem. The other physical difference between the two is on the side that's got two black buttons, and the GD-77's got a blue button and a black button, which is quite a nice touch actually to have a blue button. On the tops of the radios, sorry, the camera's not going to focus on that, but I'll just try and get it to focus in. Yeah, on the tops of the radios, this button's a slightly different shape. It's like an oval shape on the GD-77, and also the connector, the SMA connector, is different. I don't know whether you'd call that an SMA female or SMA male. There's about 4 different permutations of those SMA sockets anyway. But basically, you can't plug a GD-77 antenna into a Baofeng. Looking on the top of the Baofeng, this Baofeng is actually in pieces, so there's no internals in it, so there's no socket actually in this one, but you can see that that's circular. They've both got an LED on the top. They've both got they'll have a volume control, sorry, on that side. So apart from that, it's kind of the same really. The display is identical because I'll just try and get that to focus in again, because the Open GD-77 firmware, if I re-encrypt it such that the Baofeng bootloader will load it, it does run, and actually the display comes up okay, so the display is absolutely identical. But hardly anything's working at the moment if I try to run the Open GD-77 on the Baofeng, but I can come to that a bit later on, and hopefully in another days, weeks, it may be possible to get the Open GD-77 firmware running on the Baofeng. Anyway, so I've actually taken this Baofeng apart. I'll just move the GD-77 out of the way. To take these things apart, actually the Baofeng's slightly easier than the GD-77. Basically what you have to do is you have to unscrew 4 screws. There we go. 4 screws here. They're like star head screws, so they're not a regular cross head. You will need like a special tool, like a star shaped tool, but I just bought a little set of screwdriver set thing with them in. Actually I think they're sold as, like, you know, phone repair tools or something, so really cheaply. So you unscrew those 4, you have to just pull off the volume on and off switch, and the both on the GD-77 and on the Baofeng there's a very flat nut effectively on the SMA connector with a couple of slots in it, and it's really easy to undo. Just get a pair of long nose pliers and stick them in there, and you can just turn it around. No real special tools needed. So once you do that, then you have to kind of prise this up. It's a little bit stiff, and I should be able to get this apart because I've actually already taken this apart. So there's no PCB in this radio, which is why there's no connections to the battery that would normally be there. So you have to kind of pull this out. Now when you first pull it out, there's a couple of connections down onto the front board, there's a connection for the speaker, and which is just 2 wires, and there's a ribbon cable. But on the Baofeng, it's actually quite a long ribbon cable. I'm just going to push this forward now. That's good. It's quite a long ribbon cable, so you kind of can pull it out basically to there, because the PCB normally sits on. I'll just put it back in again because I've had it apart. So that PCB basically, sorry, that PCB sits in there onto the main chassis of the radio, and this ribbon cable goes onto that connector over there. To get it fully apart, you need to unsolder the speaker connection wires there, which is what I've done. So, and to get the this out, you just have to on the main board, you flick this connector kind of apart. You pull this black bit out of the way. I can show you in some more detail in a minute. So you kind of pull that black bit out of the way, and then the cable comes out. Virtually the same sort of thing on the GD-77, except the cable goes around the opposite way. It's not horizontal, it kind of goes in vertically, and actually it's a shorter cable on the GD-77, so it's a little bit more difficult to take apart. Apart from that, it's kind of I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to show you the GD-77 equivalent of this. It's very similar basically, with the speaker and the connections for the keyboard. This is for the keyboard and for the, I'm going to zoom in now actually, because now we've got a bit, yeah, okay, try and alter focus in a bit better. Yeah, maybe that's okay. It's about as good as I'm going to get. Anyway, so yeah, so that's inside the Baofeng. Should be able to show you inside the GD-77 maybe. Okay, so I'm not going to take that any further apart, but I'm not fussed about the keypad. That all works with the Open GD-77. That part of it's okay basically, or I can figure out the 2 missing connections for the 2 extra buttons. That shouldn't be a big deal. Anyway, so that's that part of Baofeng. Now, when you take that bit out, you get the main chassis. Now there's a whole bunch of screws. There's about 10 small screws that you have to remove, and then you can separate the main PCB from the chassis of the Baofeng. Now comparing that with a chassis of a I'll push that out of the way. Okay, so that's the chassis of the Baofeng, and this is the chassis of the GD-77. So really, they're not the same. They're very similar. I mean, you know, just looking at most of these shielding areas, these are to keep the. That's interesting. Those must be for the FETs. I'll come back to that in a minute. Anyway, so if you look at these areas of the individually shielded sections, they're very, very similar between the two. The one key difference between the two is the GD-77. In order to get it out, you actually have to unsolder the main RF connector, because it's kind of hooked inside this. Sorry, you can see it there. Inside this part of the chassis, this bit doesn't come away. This is part of the casting that the connector goes through. Sorry, it's a little bit hard to see there. Whereas on the Baofeng, they've not done that. The connector sits in there. So I suppose in some respects the GD-77 is a stronger design basically. Anyway, but apart from that, it's it's not identical on the inside. You can immediately see it's not identical. There's a change here. Positions of the power FET, I presume these are conductive. These must be heat conductive foam. I presume. I'll have to look in a minute for these pads onto the chassis basically, and the GD-77's got the same thing. So those FETs kind of similar locations, not exactly the same. So I'm just going to take that GD-77 one out of the way, and so going back to Baofeng. Okay, so it's going to be hard for me to show you all of the GD-77 because the GD-77 I've got in pieces. It's got a whole load of wires soldered onto it, but there's a really big difference between the GD-77 and the Baofeng. Sorry, the light level's going down here because the sun's gone in. but there's a really big difference between the Baofeng and the GD-77. Just trying to see if I can get any improvement on the focus. Yeah, maybe right there. Okay. In that the main microcontroller chip on the Baofeng is on the back of the PC, what I'll call the back of the PCB. Most of the other components are on the front of the PCB. So I'm going to get rid of that, get rid of the chassis for the Baofeng out the way. Okay, so rocking. So yeah, on the GD-77, basically the CPU. Sorry about the focus. I don't know what's going on with the focus here. With the GD-77, the CPU is down in that corner there. Yeah, sorry, the focus just doesn't seem to be holding very well. So the GD-77, basically the CPU is there. The DMR chip, which is the HRC6000, it does DMR and FM, but they only use it for DMR, is the same location. The rest of it, well, this is all the RF section. This bit up here, all the way up there is RF. I must have, these two chips will be the EEPROM and the flash memory. I might have got those the other way round, but that's basically what those two chips are. I must admit, I don't know what these are at the moment. Oh, this chip over here is the main RF chip. This is the AT, so it's Alpha Tango 1846S, which is just a general purpose VHF, UHF. Oh, it does 200 megahertz band as well, just an FM transceiver chip basically, which is what they use to both handle the reception and generate the FM transmission. The DMR transmission is actually handled in a subtly different way. This thing generates the carrier but doesn't generate any of the modulation on either of these two radios. So that's kind of that side of things, basically. And on the other side of the board, the CPU or microcontroller is here. Same microcontroller. This is NXP Freescale MK22 FN512. So basically the same. Might be some subtle variation in the part number, but pretty much the same CPU or microcontroller on both of them. The audio chip here is different between the two radios. In this radio, it's using a TDA chip, TDA something like 21228 or something like that. Whereas the GD-77 uses a completely different chip. I can't remember off the top of my head what the number is. It's quite a bit different between these two chips. This chip is a single-ended. It's actually a dual audio amplifier, but it's single-ended. So there's the output goes from the kind of out through the speaker down to ground. Whereas on the GD-77, it's got a I guess bidirectional, I don't know what you call it, double output. So two pins go onto the speaker inside the radio, which is actually a bit of a problem really, because when you plug in an external speaker mic, it's not then two outputs kind of push-pull to the speaker. It's just a single output. So every time they turn on the audio amplifier, you get this nasty DC. Well, you get a nasty click through the speaker, which is probably a DC level being applied when it's first turned on. So that's kind of not so good. But this chip doesn't have an enable pin like the one in the GD-77. So they've actually got an external transistor. I forget which one it is. There's a little transistor around here somewhere which actually controls the power to the whole audio amp chip. So there is a difference in that. I don't know what that chip does. Yeah, maybe something to do with the audio. Oh, no, it's probably the power control chip. Yeah, I suspect that may be the power control chip from the battery. So because basically when you turn the radio on, it gets power through the switch, but when you turn the radio off, it doesn't immediately turn off because the CPU holds the power on until it's done its shutdown process. So that could be the battery control chip, but again, don't quote me on that. I'm not entirely sure whether really that's what that is. Anyway, On the side, same sort of thing. I'll show you GD-77 in a minute, and it's pretty much the same sort of speaker volume control thing here as on the GD-77. So yeah, kind of similar. Now I'll just drag over my GD-77 now. You're going to see an absolute mass of wires on this one because, I don't know which way up I'm going to have it. Okay, I'll have it that way up. Now I need to be a bit careful because this is my experimental GD-77. So I'm just going to bring that into shot, and you can see just what on earth I have to do in order to try and understand how to control these chips and everything. So this is the GD-77, and yeah, looking at the layout of the two boards just kind of side by side, you can immediately see that the GD-77 CPU, so a microcontroller, is over here, whereas it's on the opposite underside of the board. Kind of, I guess it's just directly below where it was in the Baofeng, really. But they've put the DMR chip over that side, and on this board on the Baofeng, now these little chips are audio switch chips, and they route the signal, either the audio like the speaker out from that chip there, which is that's the RF chip or FM, transceiver on a chip. So its audio output in FM mode gets routed through one of these two, I forget which one it was, gets routed through and then directly into the audio amplifier in FM mode. But in DMR mode, the audio output from that chip gets routed into this chip here, which is the DMR chip, which does the decoding, and then that DMR data gets sent into the microcontroller, which is obviously on the back of the board, and then that decompresses it effectively, and then sends the wave audio back through the DMR chip, and it outputs the audio, which then gets routed through one of these little audio switch chips, and then that goes into the speaker amplifier again. And then also one of these handles the speaker, effectively where the speaker is fed from, and the other one handles where the microphone it goes to. So in FM, the microphone input goes into the RF chip. So I'm not sure if it's in shot. No, probably not in shot. So in FM mode, the mic just goes into the RF chip. Yeah, sorry, the focus is a bit off, but I'm moving things around a bit. Yeah, it goes into the RF chip, whereas in DMR mode, the audio from the mic goes into the DMR chip and is digitized. So, again, it switches that. I think, to be honest, really they could have done it a different way. I'm not even sure that switch is actually needed, because I think in reality they could just constantly feed the maybe the mic input to both. I don't know. Yeah, maybe they can't. I think under some conditions one of these isn't totally necessary, basically. But oh, that's in transmission. Yeah, in transmission I think they have to disconnect the mic. But I thought maybe they could just turn down the mic gain, and so it didn't get any audio back into it from the DMR chip. But maybe they decided that didn't work very well. Anyway, so there's a difference basically, in the two PCBs. I'm trying to work out how to get this all into shot. Now it can just come back that way a little bit. Okay, so yeah, so you can see there's a definite difference between those two. I mean, they're very similar, but they're not identical basically. And the problem with running the OpenGD-77 on this one, which is the Baofeng, is because the CPU chip, the microcontroller chip's on the back, then the PCB layout in terms of how things are connected to each other is quite a lot different. I mean, I'm surprised, to be honest, that even the display works, and the connection to the I'm just going to take the GD-77 out of the way. Just before I take the GD-77 out of the way, The reason I've got all these wires soldered on is that it's going to go into a logic analyzer. So I've been analysing the data traffic between the HRC6000 chip and the microcontroller chip, basically to try and understand how the official firmware controls it, because really there's next to no documentation on the DMR chip. The other thing that I was also doing is looking at the access to the flash memory as well. That's why there's a whole bunch of wires onto there. But that's to try and understand how I can optimize the access to the flash memory in terms of what speed it can operate at. But those aren't quite so important. These ones are the really important ones, which I need to do some more work on actually. In terms of programming, I'll show you on the Baofeng rather than the GD-77, but basically there's some solder pads on the reverse side of the board, and you can hook those up to a pretty cheap programmer tool in order to actually reflash directly the firmware into the ROM. I mean, you can use the bootloader, but in terms of fully debugging the radio, then you kind of have to go the whole hog and erase the whole CPU and rewrite the bootloader and everything, because it's just impractical to upload everything through the USB cable. Oh yeah, it's the other thing I should point out, difference between the two. I guess just to make it a point of difference between the two radios, between the Baofeng and the GD-77, is the USB cables aren't, the speaker mic USB cables aren't interchangeable. But all they've done is they've just swapped over the data lines, just to make the radios different, I guess, just so as you couldn't use a Baofeng cable with a GD-77. There's no other reason for it. So they've swapped the D plus and D minus lines on the USB cables, so they basically don't work. I mean, you could make a cable with a crossover switch, basically, that just switched the D plus and D minus lines over, and then you could have a Baofeng or GD-77 or TYT, because it's the same on the GD-77 as the TYT radios. The connections are the same. Anyway, so that's basically the Baofeng internal to the DM-1801, kind of compared with the internals of the GD-77. So as you can see, on the outside, what would appear to be very similar radios. On the inside, not hugely different, but different enough such that the Open GD-77, the firmware for each radio will not run. The Baofeng firmware wouldn't run on the GD-77, and vice versa. And at the moment, the Open GD-77 won't run on the Baofeng. I'm going to have to do a special build of it. But hopefully, because really, apart from that, all really, the important chips are basically the same on these two radios. They've got the same RF chip, same DMR chip, I think the same EEPROM, same flash memory, same CPU. Very subtle difference to the audio chip, but that doesn't really make much difference. Same kind of two LEDs up here. There's two tiny little transistors that drive them. So yeah, basically, kind of similar but not the same. So my next job basically is to actually figure out the connections between all of the peripherals that don't work currently, which is the speaker, the LEDs don't work. I'm not sure whether these buttons on the side work with the Open GD-77, like the PTT. I think the PTT works. Not sure. I can't remember about the other two. Maybe they do. Maybe they don't. And here all the audio path controls, I need to figure out how to control them. Also there's there's a main antenna switch in here somewhere. It should probably be up here somewhere. So there's a main antenna switch chip between receive and transmit. There's also preamp enables. Well, if it's the same as the GD-77, which almost certainly will be because it's kind of a non-identical clone, there'll be preamp enables for the VHF and UHF separately, and also there'll be PA enables as well. So I need to figure out all those connections to the microcontroller, which again will all be different. But it's just kind of a question of spending time, quite a lot of time, going through with and actually buzzing it with a meter it's a bit tricky, but it's not too bad. So in order to do this, I've ended up I had a go at this the other day actually and didn't succeed really, because I need to move the camera across a bit, because I got confused about the orientation of the chip. So what I've ended up doing is actually printing out a nice big picture of the chip, and then what I can do is I want to figure out which pin 1 is. Okay, so that's pin 1 up here on this diagram, which is pin 1 there on the microcontroller. And then when I use my connection tester to buzz between, say, here and up to the LEDs, I can then note down on this which pins, because I think one of the LEDs is you can't see that on camera. I think one of the LEDs is on a pin here, but I need to confirm this. So once I've mapped out what all of the pin connections that don't currently work, then I should be able to do a rebuild, recompile of the Open GD-77 in order to sorry, I'm trying to get this in. I'm never going to get this square on mine. No, it's all back to front anyway. So yeah, but once I've done that, then I think there's a pretty high probability I should be able to get the Open GD-77 firmware running on the Baofeng DM-1801.